are on fire today on this business track, and it just gets hotter for you right now with Beth, Shero, and James Cowie. Beth is the COO and co-founder of Shero Commerce. Beth has a background in graphic design, UX, UI, and has been working with e-commerce and web application development for over 10 years. Her specialty is helping clients find the best e-commerce solution to maximize their sales and helping the Shero team achieve their goals. Beth is a Magento solution specialist that can assemble any e-commerce project from start to finish, addressing everything in between. James is a veteran PHP and Magento developer and has been CTO of Shero Commerce since 2018. Before joining Shero, in his role at Magento, James helped architect some of the biggest Magento implementations in the world. James specializes in test-driven development, behavior-driven development, and loves architecting new Magento websites, leading dev teams, and optimizing websites for top performance. Join me in the chat to welcome Beth and James.
Thanks so much, TJ. We're super excited to talk about planning and successful delivery. So just like TJ said, welcome. I'm Beth Shero, and I'm here with James Cowie. We've been working together for a number of years with our customers to do deep discoveries. And through that process, we've learned about impact mapping and how it can empower our customers to be more successful and for us all to align to implement great e-commerce projects. So as you can see from the agenda, today we're focused on impact mapping, and we'll follow up with a client success story so you can see how we actually use this method with an actual client, Havendash. To get started, just a quick intro to us about us at Shero Commerce. We've been in business for 10 years. We are a full-service, value-based e-commerce agency specializing in Magento. And we are headquarters in New York, and we have teams in Helsinki, London, and Tirana. So what is this talk about? We are here to help you get your project started by using a technique called impact mapping. So to help you understand how this might apply to you, we wanted to create a couple of scenarios and align with you. So you may be planning an e-commerce website or evaluating a new platform, or you're not sure how to align with your decision makers and get your team and your development agency all speaking the same language and achieving goals together. Or we're in a time of uncertainty. You may be unsure of how your decisions are going to improve your bottom line, or you don't want to negatively affect your customers. This is a sensitive time. We need to make good decisions up front. And then finally, maybe you just need a solid plan to make sure that you're successful with your e-commerce project. I can't say it enough how many failed implementations I've actually seen throughout the years that have failed expectations, taken too long to deliver, or cost our customers money. Nobody wants to lose money, and the longer it takes for you to actually launch and have success on your e-commerce platform, it's costing you time and money. So how does impact mapping work? Impact mapping is a lightweight collaborative planning technique for teams that want to make a big impact with software development projects. Impact maps help delivery teams and stakeholders visualize roadmaps. It explains how deliverables connect to the user's needs and communicates how the user's outcomes relate to your higher business goals. Whew, what a mouthful, right? So let's summarize it. Over the years, we've seen projects fail, costing time and money. This is due to the fact that your agency and yourself, the merchant, maybe aren't aligned. You do your best as the merchant to plan, create an RFP, you get the right implementer to get your e-commerce site up and running, but you really don't know what you don't know. And this is where impact mapping comes in. It's really about processing larger ideas and aligning on the why, who, how, and what. To complete a software development project successfully, you can't do it alone. You need buy-in. And you need a thorough understanding of the project scope from both sides and accountability from all stakeholders so you can be successful together. And impact mapping really helps clear up assumptions. So a great example of this is with an ERP integration. I don't think I've ever seen a simple ERP integration, but I've had merchants come to me and say, hey, I just need, my orders from Magento into my ERP. No problem, just like get that done. And it's like, well, hold up. There might be 3 companies involved, the merchant, us, and maybe there's a partner actually managing the ERP. How do we all align on the deliverables, the business goals, and manage who's responsible for what? This is a heavy task. So using a process like impact mapping can help you build your project right the first time. And to get started, another big thing that we've seen throughout the years is we're working with a lot of different people and larger organizations, and we're all speaking in a different language. And we may be very well actually communicating to each other, but we're not actually talking to each other in a way where we understand each other. So there's a lot of miscommunication. You have the business people that are speaking in their business terminology. You have the developer talking in code, and nobody's really actually communicating, right? And this can lead to a lot of technical debt. And with the power of using this technique, impact mapping, we've really helped create a common language where we're all speaking on the same terms so that we can learn how to work together better. So the end result of this is that you have business people that understand what the developer is talking about, and the developer understands what the business person is talking about. And we learn this from the bottom up to understand each other's lingo and have a common language. And this really helps us eliminate all assumptions so we can all be successful. So now I'm going to pass it off to our CTO, James Cowie, who will dive into impact mapping and defining it.
Awesome, thanks Beth. So let's start by defining what impact mapping is. So in layman's terms, we go into an impact mapping with the assumption that a specific deliverable will lead to a specific behavioural change, and that particular behavioural change will help the organisation achieve its goal. Sounds simple, but how do we actually go about doing that? Well, it's a process of 4 steps. You start with the why, or the goal. Why do we need to do this? A really good example is migrate to a new e-commerce platform. So that's the goal. Now we need to look at who can help that. Who's going to have the desired effect? Who's going to be a blocker to that? Who are the consumers or users of the product, and how will they be impacted by it? And here is where we actually think about the real users. Real examples, so active users, our marketing guys, external ad agencies. They're the who, the actors. You then start to look at the impacts, or the how. So how should our actors' behaviour change? How can they help us achieve that goal? How can they obstruct us or prevent us from succeeding? And finally, the deliverable, the what. What can we do as an organisation or a delivery team to support that impact? Notice that even here, we're not talking about a feature, but we're trying to be as open as possible, because it's often cheaper and a lot more desirable to solve a problem with no lines of code than it is to create a solution from code that's not required. So in summary, you go with the why, you find out the who, you discover the how, and you deliver the what. But where do we get started? What we found from running the impact mapping workshops is that they have to be structured. Now, when you're doing an impact mapping, it does take time. You've got to get collaborators in the room, and it's really important that you keep people focused. Now, what we found is that while we're managing Magento projects, we normally have from the client side project managers, e-commerce managers, marketing managers, developers, designers, C-level executives. And then from the Shero side, we have our project managers, our business analysts, a lead developer, a DevOps, a designer, the front-end team, the back-end team, and the QA team. Now, if we've got all of these people all the time, then it's very difficult to keep people focused. But on the same side, it's very important that they remain understandable and have that shared ubiquitous language of what are we trying to achieve? What is the goal? So really make sure that you get the right people in the right room at the right time so that you can have those right conversations. Make sure that you're structured, focus on your unique selling points, how you measure it. If you've got no goal, if you've got a goal that you can't measure, then is it really a goal that you should be working on right now? And then really look at the bits that could negatively impact it. So if we do a Magento migration now, what could go wrong? It's good to know about that ahead of time. Keep the impact mapping workshop structured by using these techniques. Now, one of the goals of creating these impact mapping workshops is that you end up with user stories and acceptance criteria. They're really important because if you're familiar with agile terminology, you've probably heard about user stories, and they're just an informal explanation of a software feature from the perspective of the end user. It's the purpose to how you can articulate the software feature so that it's then understandable by more people. And what I really like about user stories is, yes, it captures the scenario, the functionality, the desired behavior, but it's also a reminder to have another conversation in the future, because you might do the impact mapping at the beginning of the project, even though it's an ongoing process. But that user story reminds you that I need to talk to Beth. She understands about fulfillment, or she knows about the advertising that then solves this business goal. So always look at the user story in the format of, as a user, or as a type of user, I want to do something so that I can achieve that goal. Relate it back to the impact maps goal. Make sure that you define acceptance criteria, because that's what's going to tell you whether you're successful or not. And one of the questions that we get asked all the time is, who's responsible for that acceptance criteria? Well, the answer to that is everybody is. Right? Everybody needs to be aware of the success. Okay, everybody to write the acceptance criteria. And why we say that's important is because acceptance criteria is one of the most important parts of this process. If you've got unclear acceptance criteria, you just go round and round and round. You're going to be continuously checking the results. You're going to be changing. You're going to have to do work of development. It's not a clear flight path. Nobody wants to fly from Manchester to New York by going via Ireland, Kuwait, Amsterdam, all those places. You want to go from A to B as quickly as possible. And that's why clear acceptance criteria really helps you understand that value and achieve that goal. Now, what we found from writing user stories specifically is we've got a checklist of what we feel are the best ways to write a user story. And user stories, as I say, they are the backbone of impact mapping. You've got your impact map that then relates to one or more user stories. So you want to make your user stories as impactful as possible. And to do that, always make sure that the user comes first. Focus on personas and people. Make sure that you collaborate with everybody. Keep the story simple, reiterate until you're happy, keep the stories close to the work, always accessible and visible, stick them on the wall or put them in Jira, and don't just rely on stories, use UI mockups where applicable. And that leads you to what to do after impact mapping. Now, don't just think that impact mapping is done and you've got your technical specification. Be agile, create story points for those user stories, create releasable impact maps. Use it in an agile way so that you can create a program of work that's impactful and meaningful for the clients. And with that, I'm going to hand you back over to Beth, where she'll talk about our client Haberdasher.
Thanks so much, James. Yeah, so useful and so empowering for all of the people that we've worked through this experience. And a great example is with our Haberdasher Magento 2 Commerce implementation. Who is Haberdasher? Haberdasher is a B2B manufacturer of sewing threads and pre-wound bobbins. They came to us on Magento 1 Enterprise and needed to migrate to Magento 2 Commerce with B2B features. We chose early on to do impact mapping with their team because they had multiple stakeholders and complex business requirements. Some of the challenges we identified during impact mapping was that they wanted a great user experience for their B2B customers, but they didn't want their customers to get lost in a redesign. They also wanted to ensure that the customers retained their correct pricing. Additionally, to achieve the B2B features on Magento 1, they had a number of customizations, which created a complex data structure that needed to be evaluated, and we needed to make sure that that data transferred to Magento 2 so we wouldn't lose any of that data. And that was super important for the success of their team, their customers, and their implementation. And this leads me to my final point, where they wanted to focus on default features where possible over customizations so that their overall cost of ownership could be less. So the B2B module on Magento 2 Commerce was a big piece of this and a big piece of their business. So with impact mapping, we were able to work through the challenge of evaluating on Magento 1 what customizations were valuable, which ones were actually even being used by their customers, and how they could be empowered to use the default B2B module in Magento 2 to actually be successful with it. And this really came together with an educational process and talking and aligning with everybody's needs to make sure we were on the same page and that they felt confident with the feature that was default and that they could actually be successful without the customizations. And the real benefit of this is the overall cost of ownership is less. We were able to get them up and running faster without those customizations, and the technical debt is less. So it's a big win long-term for them so they can upgrade more easily on Magento 2. So this is just a great example of how we used impact mapping with their use case. We used it for all of their site, but this was probably one of our biggest wins. So let's take a look at the results, how impact mapping provided these results. After the discovery with impact mapping, we were all aligned and understood how we were going to deliver this project on time, on budget, with no surprises, and impact mapping allowed us to do that. And as you can see from the results, the client was super happy, but not only were they happy, but we had positive results without all the negative concerns they had. We overcame them because we outlined them upfront with impact mapping. And we decreased their load speed on their pages, which then increased transactions, revenue, and conversions. So overall, their customers were really happy and able to do a lot more with the B2B module that was default in Magento 2 Commerce. And obviously, we couldn't have done it without their team support and all the collaboration that we had. So I really want to thank Cavendish and also James here for helping me out with this talk. And I really want to thank you all for joining. And I hope you all learned something that you can take away to actually use in your business to save you time and money. Who doesn't need that today? And as a special thanks, we're offering a free impact mapping cheat sheet on our website at sherocommerce.com/impact-mapping. So please free to visit it to learn more there and download our cheat sheet. And if you have any questions or challenges with this process or with anything with e-commerce, of course, you can reach out to myself, Beth Shero, and James Cowie. We are on Twitter, LinkedIn, and you have my email on the screen here. So once again, thank you so much.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes here for the Q&A. So I made a mistake last time. I ended it too soon. I know there's a little bit of a delay. But let's try to get those questions in as soon as possible, just to make sure we can get those answered for you. So we're gonna take the 5 minutes here. If we gotta just kill it, we gotta talk about the weather. I'm gonna give you guys 5 minutes to get your questions in. So I'll start with my own question. Is there a size merchant or project where this just doesn't make sense? Like, what are the indicators you look for when you're talking to a merchant to determine whether or not you use this process?
Yeah, great question. I would say that obviously with larger merchants, this becomes more critical with larger teams and implementations, but honestly, this can really be used with any size merchant. You just need to scale it down to really focus on the areas that are most risky, let's say. So you can run it really quickly and have answers and results within an hour, for example. So it's very powerful to really get to the bottom of things if you need to.
You have any examples of scaling it down though?
Yeah, we actually have like a simplified sheet where we just run through and really get down and dirty on like what actually needs to get done. Like the example I gave with the ERP integration, things like that are more complex that everyone makes decisions on and aligns on and understands who the stakeholders are.
Understand that. It doesn't look like we've got any questions. Again, I'm going to give you a couple of minutes here before we call it. Get those questions posted. Anything else in particular you wanted to, I guess any parting shots here before we call this session?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is that don't feel intimidated by this process. I know it may sound like, oh, that's like so easy to talk about, but how do I actually get started, right? Funny enough, James and I were talking about this yesterday. I think that for us to get to this point, we stumbled through it and, kind of made our Shero version of impact mapping to get to this point where we're actually doing proper impact mapping. So you can really learn from it and kind of work through it with your team to feel empowered and, use it in any way you can to feel like you can achieve your goals. It's really just a guideline to get you started, and don't feel intimidated by it. James, do you have anything you want to add?
I mean, it's such an eye-opening process because the moment you talk to not only developers, but the client as well about what's the value that you want from this, like you can see developers cogs turning where it's like, wow, I didn't think about that somebody could have a negative impact in this feature that we're building. So you really get to understand more about, why are we building this software? Do we need to build it? Can we go with, like Beth said, the B2B out of the box feature? So to get everybody on that same page, it's such a phenomenal tool. I definitely would recommend anyone to take a look at it. It's well worth it.
Also, I appreciate the presentation. Again, for those watching at home, you can just hang out here if you want to stay on the business track, and we'll fire up that next presentation here in just a few moments, and I'll see you then.